Hello, my name is Matthew Popachek, and today I'm going to give you a little bit of insight into the emergency medical services of Allegheny County. For today's purposes, I'm going to be talking about Robinson EMS, where I work at, to give you a little bit of insight on what I do at work and how it works. EMS is a complex system to answer emergency calls 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Call volumes can range, in our case, of 7,000 calls to 10,000 calls a year, and in the city of Pittsburgh, more than 72,000 calls per year. Throughout this presentation, you will learn how EMS gets dispatched, how we find out how the call works, what happens when we show up on scene, and what happens after the call once we leave. I've been doing EMS and fire for 7 years, so I'm very familiar with all of this and hope this can give you a little bit of insight into what I do. So right here's a picture of our ambulance up at Robinson EMS. Before we do anything, someone has to call 911. So say you call 911. You're going to get a 911 call taker that's going to take all of your information regarding the emergency, where you are, what's going on with the patient, anything along those lines. Once the 911 call taker collects all that information, it goes to a dispatcher. The dispatcher takes all of that information and disseminates it to us. They do this through radio channeling, so they'll call us on a radio, they'll send in a CAD, which is on a laptop, and they will also text it to our phones through a system called Active 911. Once we get that, we figure out how severe the call is, and then we determine if we're going to go lights and sirens, or we're not going to go lights and sirens, and we're going to take our time getting there, because you don't want to make unnecessary harm that doesn't need to be done. So once we respond to calls, the biggest thing that we have to do is patient assessment. We have to get to the patient and figure out what's going on with the patient. Like, we would want to check if it's pulmonary related, cardiac related. It can be hypoglycemia, hyperglycemia, depending on what the patient's presenting like. It could be stroke-like symptoms, anything along those lines. Once we do that, we need to extricate the patient from where they are. So this right here is a picture of a special extrication vehicle that is used to take patients off of hillsides and trails that we have a lot of in Robinson. Like, we have the Panhandle Trail and some other trails that go around that people can get stuck on, like biking accidents and other things along those lines. Right here is another form of extrication that we need to do. This is a two-vehicle motor vehicle accident that I was involved with, that we arrived on scene and we had to take the patient and cut them out of the car. This prolonged extrication, which took a lot of time to get the patient out so we could continue care. Once we get the patient in a safe location out of the scene like this, we get them into the back of the ambulance and we start doing field assessments. So we start doing testing like EKGs, blood sugars, stroke scales, anything along those lines. Right here is an example of one of those EKGs. This patient was having some angina, so we checked it out and it was basically fine. There was a little bit of QT wave syndrome and a little bit along those lines. Nothing crazy, but we got him figured out. But we give some drugs if need be. If this was a SVT patient or rapid AFib patient, we could give them drugs like Cardizem to slow it down and other things along those lines. So once we get all this information, it helps us with the diagnostic process. We get them treated in the ambulance if we can, and it gets all the information ready for the hospital. Once we get all the information ready for the hospital, we have to go into the emergency room. We take the patient into the emergency room where we put them on their respected bed that has been assigned to them and give a report to the nurse. Whenever we give a report to the nurse, we tell them everything that happened on the call and what happened prior to our arrival, like how we got them out of the car or out of the house, anything along those lines, so they know exactly what's happening. So at this point, care is transferred to them. They know what happened on the call, and they are now taking care of the patient. After that, it goes back to us, where we have to restock our drugs. In this case, this is naloxone that we'd use on a patient that overdosed, an opioid overdose, and we had to get that stuff back so we can use it on the next call. So the hospitals give us these drugs, and they give us like IV supplies, anything along those lines, so we have everything that we need for the next call. Following that, we do decontamination of the ambulance. We clean everything up and decon it so we don't get any other patients sick. After we have deconned the ambulance, we have to switch roles a little bit. We have to go back to our station and do patient care reports. These patient care reports can be anything from 16 to 19 pages, depending on everything that we did. We sit down, we write these reports online. It's a complete synopsis of what happened, everything that we did, any drug that we gave, any intervention, how we got the patient out of the car, how we got the patient out of the house. Everything covers all the bases. This paper goes to the state, which gets reviewed by the EMS boards to make sure that we're doing our jobs correctly. And on top of that, it also becomes a part of the patient's medical records. So this was a complete synopsis on how an EMS call works. I could go into a lot more detail about it, but for the sake of this, this is about all you need to know. EMS is always here if you need it. Anything can happen at any time. 911 is only a couple dials on your phone, and we'll show up within a couple minutes. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this. I hope you learned a thing or two, and thank you so much.